Hello and welcome. I'm Liam Clickinger, Director of APA San Francisco. American Photographic Artists is a not-for-profit trade organization built by photographers for photographers and exists to provide business tools and creative inspiration which help photographic artists of all levels run a smarter, more creative, and profitable business. I'd like to thank all of our current members for your continued support and encourage that if you're not currently a member, you visit us on the web at apanational.org to learn more about membership and its benefits. Today, I'd like to introduce one of our local members here at APA San Francisco, Jon Milavec, who has graciously volunteered to help our chapter create and share inspiring content for and about our photographic community. So thanks for all you do, Jon. Take it away.
Hi, everybody. My name is Jon Milavec. I own Mixed Bag Media. It's a video and photo production company with offices here in Northern California and in Atlanta, Georgia. And we're here today conducting interviews for APA San Francisco, talking with the 2021 winners of the Something Personal contest, an annual contest we hold to really feature the work that photographers here in the Bay Area, but also all around North America, do on their own to really exercise those creative muscles. And today we've got Lindsay Sue from Vancouver, British Columbia with us. Snow just fell, and so while her kids are hoping for days off, we're going to take some time and talk about some of her work. So Lindsay, thank you for being with us. Tell us a little bit about you, who you are, and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. My name is Lindsay. I'm a photographer based in Canada. I predominantly shoot advertising, entertainment, artwork. I love shooting people, love shooting stuff with, conceptual work and, stuff with really great ideas behind it. And I just really love directing people and working with really awesome people.
Nice.
Yeah.
Cool. So how long have you been shooting?
I started, my career started, back in the early 2000s. I worked as a photo assistant for a period of time. And then,
Okay.
right when digital kind of came in to play, I worked as a digital tech, like I was an early adopter of digital, back in the days with like the 6-megapixel camera, and that was so
I have
expensive.
I have a Ziploc bag in one of my drawers with old memory cards that from that era.
That era, yeah, exactly. Back in those days, when we saved things to, CDs and DVDs and all that kind of stuff. Worked as a digital tech for a number of years, and then I started shooting on my own.
Nice.
And that was probably in around 2007, 2008.
Okay.
And then in that period, career-wise, it's obviously had its own trajectory. I'm a mom too, so there's like that whole aspect of blending work and personal and getting that all done.
All the juggling that has to be done to make both work.
Totally. Yeah.
Well, hey, I mean, you already mentioned that you love working with people and directing people. One of the things that we're going to talk about more in depth in a little bit when we go to your website and go through some images there, because I've got some questions for you about some of the many great images on your website. But tell me more about that. What is it that drew you to shooting with people, liking to have people on camera, directing them, pulling emotion out of them? How did that come about? Is that something like, were you a drama kid in school, or how did that come to be?
I was a drama kid in school, but I don't think I was a very good one. Like, really, wasn't my strength. But no, you know what? I just love, honestly, I love people. I love stories. I love hearing where people came from. I think that even as I've gotten older, it's been interesting to think about, how when you're young, you assume everyone has the same life as you, and everyone who you're around, all the other kids, that thing I was talking about earlier about like not caring about, things going on in the world. Because when you're a kid, you just don't know. And
Right.
I think that as I've gotten older, it's been really, really interesting to me to like learn more about other people that I know really well, and hearing
Uh-huh.
what they went through. And I find it fascinating. You know, I am a child of immigrant parents.
Hmm.
So I realize that that is so different than the reality for other people. So I just love those stories. But, you know, when you hear um, stories about what people have done, but what they've gone through to do what they do, you know, there's just so much behind, you know, what makes a person, I guess.
Absolutely.
Um, so I think, you
Everything you
know,
just described is what I love about my work too, because for years, uh, my company has mainly made interview-based videos, and we work with real people most often. And I
yeah,
tell people all the time, the best part of my job is all the people I get to meet, because I get to hear all these different stories for all those different life paths that have led to us being in the same room at this point in time.
totally, totally. And like I love that. So I think I love meeting people. And then too, you know, just with respect to directing people, I think it's um interesting just to see, you know, there's always something behind the eyes, like there's always something going on in people's brains. And I think it's interesting to kind of help express that or help share that. So, you know, I guess honestly, it could be like photographing someone as a portrait and really capturing the essence of that person. Or even in, you know, some of my creative work or some of the, you know, advertising, you know, when there's kind of conceptual ideas behind it, it's interesting even to take talent through the idea of like being that person. I just
Hmm.
love that. I think it's really fun.
Tell me about that conversation, whether it's with a real person or a talent, of like, okay, look, here's what I'm going for. Here's what this character would be imagining or thinking or going through. How did you develop those directorial skills to get the look and feel you're going for?
You know what? I don't I don't really know. It's I think it's one thing that I just love to imagine, like watch movies or TV shows and, you
Uh-huh.
know, really think about why people do the things that they do. Um,
Hmm.
you know, and when you think about like some of the best TV shows or your favorite TV shows, there's like always like things lurking under the surface, or people do things that are out of character. But then when you think about like why would they have done, yeah, I get it. You know, like there's
Like, hmm.
yeah, and it's kind of like people's darkest stuff or insecurities or, you know, we all do things for such different reasons than what people can see on the outside.
Hmm.
Um, good and bad, I guess. But yeah, I love exploring that. So, you know, even when I do my own creative work, I do like to think about like instead of like throwing all these people together and like, you know, interact and smile, like it's more of like you're feeling this, you might be feeling
Hmm.
this, you know, the overall vibe is this. Um, and you know, and giving people the room to like explore their own versions of their character. Like what would
Yeah.
you be doing? Would you be, you know, would your hands be clenched? Would you, you know, be in a moment of relaxing? Like there's all just like the body language and, you know,
Right.
like shifty eyes. Yeah, there's so much.
Well, hey, let's go ahead and get to your website, because I mean, for this is a perfect transition to explore some of your specific images, because one of the things that I'm really curious about is to show our viewers some of these emotions that you're able to draw out of people. So stand by just one second. Let
Cool.
me share screen, and then we will, kind of dig into your site, some of your work,
This is
both
going to be interesting. I think
advertising
I did a
and
shake up,
personal.
so I don't even know what it's going to look like when you pull it up.
Uh-oh. All right, let's see. All right, here we go. And so, just here on your homepage, there's a wide variety, but everything people is people focused. And I this guy right here, he's one of the very first that like totally grabbed my attention. Is like, what is up with that guy? I love him. I love that face. And then
Yeah.
that really got me looking around and noticing that, I mean, that is kind of a key aspect of your images, the faces and what you're able to convey in looks and in people's faces.
Oh,
And
thank
so,
you.
yeah. And I love that you have kids, but then NBC advertising, that you cover a really wide spectrum, yet all of these people, whether celebrities or not, are all brought into the same plane.
Oh, thank you.
Sure. Well, and so, is do tell me a little bit. You've described kind of your directorial abilities of kind of how you get somebody leaning in a certain direction. Tell us about the next step of, well, when there's a bunch of lights, when there's a bunch of people, when the agency contacts are there, how does that play into the ability to pull these emotions and looks out of people, whether professional talent or not?
Well, I honestly, I think it is about number one, just getting a good rapport with who you're photographing. So, I try to have a moment to chat with them if possible. I think, a lot of the times, it's different depending on what type of shoot it is. I find that, on the bigger entertainment jobs, there's so little time. We need to cut right to the chase. And I think it's about, talking about that. It's not really an elephant in the room, but like discussing that right off the top, saying, I know we don't have a lot of time, and being
Right.
really earnest and honest about it. This is what I'm looking for. And I think, honestly, a background helps a lot as well. Like, I think with the entertainment stuff, having a good sense of the show, or if it's a pilot, having read the script, just so that
Hmm.
that you're not walking into a shoot without knowing anything. I think that generally getting a gist of like, what is this character about? What is this, how do they feel? What do they think? I think
Right.
helps a lot. Um, Projects with children, or just, more traditional portraiture, if there is a little bit more time, I think it's just nice to just get in there and chat with people a little bit, and just to be real. And then
Hmm.
sometimes you just get like those really, really nice images. And then I'd say at the same time, like a lot of the times people are uncomfortable. Um, and I think there's the balance of deciding whether or not you're going to make them comfortable completely, or if that image is about showing them feeling shy. And I find that you get that with kids a lot. Like, it takes them quite a while to shake out of
Yep.
it. And
You know,
there is
I've
something beautiful about that kind of insecurity, or something beautiful about them just being vulnerable with you.
I've gone through a very similar process with interviews, that it took me a while to learn a technique of, when you're interviewing somebody, to not be aggressive or mean, but you can be slightly confrontational so that they will be like, no, what I do is,
That's
to
interesting. Yeah.
try and pull a harder, stronger reaction out of them. It's like, if you challenge them just a touch,
Oh,
it
that's
can yield
interesting.
a
Yeah.
bigger reaction, kind of like you're describing. It's like, it's not necessarily always saying, I want you to be earnest and serious and, no smile. You
Yeah.
can use different techniques on how to get the desired look or reaction.
Totally. Well, it's funny because I even think back, I've been spending a lot of time looking at old photos and old family photos. And
Hmm.
I remember I had this uncle, I'll call him my uncle, but he was actually my uncle's older brother.
Okay.
And I loved him. But what was funny is he did take a lot of our family photos, and typically it was like a whole bunch of us, like grandkids, and no one really wanted to be there, some surly teenagers, and he would just always yell, cheese. And just the forced reaction, our faces almost look the same, with like a
Hmm.
forced smile in every single one. And
Yep.
yeah, so it's one of the things where it's like, I think that that's fun if you wanted to. I don't usually say cheese, but whether or not you force a reaction out of someone, or just really let them, be soft with you. um
Well, one of the
and
things that
ease into it.
resonated, with me about so many of your images is the lack of teeth. That was something, like, once I got back into photography while doing video, I learned very quickly. I personally love images where it's not the big cheese.
Right.
Huge smile, big teeth. It's like you often can get so much from just a little grin. I mean, like this guy here. I mean, all of these people right here on this row, it's like just enough that you know everything you need to know.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
That
that's interesting. I hadn't really thought about the teeth thing, but at the same time, I'll say like I have like a crooked front tooth that I know that I'm
okay.
self-conscious about. But the funny thing is it's also those things that make people them. And I do know that I come across a lot of people who don't want to show teeth, which is just
Right.
a funny thing. Yeah. But
Well, hey, let's talk about first, considering we're here to talk about, that you are with us because of being one of the winning photographers of the 2021 Something Personal contest. I want to look at some of those images, and then we're going to move on and look at some that you just submitted for this year's contest. Okay.
absolutely.
All right. Stand by. And so another thing that I'm really curious about with your work, especially your personal projects, is the time and dedication it takes to pull these things off. I mean, once I realized that this whole series was a personal project, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't like going to shoot some, little product set up in your garage. This is serious. Like there's a lot of people involved, a lot that had to go into this for planning. Tell me about kind of from concept to completion in a nutshell. How does a project like this happen, and what compels you to say, you know what, this isn't for anybody else, it's for me, but I'm going to make it happen?
Oh, thanks. Well, honestly, I have some great collaborators that I work with that, I bounce off ideas off of constantly. And we talk about doing things that we just want to do. And I know, that's like a real gift, and so fortunate to like have people to collaborate with, but also just have the time and space, to plan it out. And I do love that there's so much less pressure on personal work than there is real, paying jobs, in that, you can take the time to craft and really think about it. I think, the risk that you run is that it just dies and you're like, forget it, like no time, or this isn't relevant anymore. So I do think that one of the things that, drives me to do stuff is I think of something that feels so perfect and relevant for now. And I think that kind of gives me a kick in the butt to like do it. Because if I don't do it, I won't do it. And,
Right.
I do have like a book, with filled with ideas, and a lot of them truthfully did die in the book. You're like sketch something out, you're like, I'm totally going to shoot this. And you don't.
This is going to be awesome.
Yeah. Or it's like something you'd planned. You're like, oh, I'm going to do like a baby thing. And I have a baby right now. I'm going to do this. And then the next thing you know, your baby's 5 and you're like, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Like, oh, well.
So for this, it was an idea of, it was really the concept first. And it was, well, it was the idea. So I have a hair and makeup artist, this collaborator that I work with, and she, wanted to, flex her kind of creative muscles, with respect to like dressing the same person in different ways. And we often talk about like vintage clothes, and I love clothes in general, wardrobe and styling as well. So it was kind of that sort of exercise about how people can shapeshift and look completely different. And that was kind of, we had started talking about that. And then it kind of grew into just topics I think that were on our mind, or on my mind at that time. And, like I'd mentioned, like immigrant parents, my experience has been different than others. And I know a lot of people's have been, like, everyone's background is so different. And it was kind of the idea of what was life like, and what was life like 50 years ago, 60 years ago, versus the life that I live now, only by the chance that I was born now, or only by the chance that I live in Canada or North America. How would life be different? And that's something that I think about quite a lot. Just the timing of that pure luck of being who you are when you are.
I think about that quite a bit. I totally understand that process.
Yeah. So it's kind of, this kind of started from that idea. And then, I think often about like how in our culture we talk a lot about like the good old days, and when like life was simple, and like the perfect
Uh-huh.
family, and and I know that for people that I know, that wasn't perfect at all. It was actually really, really hard, and we just didn't talk
Mm-hmm.
about it. So this project was kind of that flip and emerging of those ideas, being like, what was life like then, um, to how is life now? Where might you be if you were, born at a different time? So, the idea is all of the cast is exactly the same. So as far as production and getting commitment, it was something. And I don't know, it was tough. I think there's 10 talent to have them commit, because it was on different dates that we shot these, to
Okay.
spend the day with us twice, and to bring back that same kind of character or role. So, and the general idea, you'd see like there's that woman who is the nurse, like, who today, it's interesting that, today women tend to travel and work, and,
Right.
can do things on our own, or have the ability to be on their own, where, in the past you may not have worked, may not have had that freedom. And even young
Absolutely.
girls, like, you know we get married so much later now, and the
Mm-hmm.
idea of like arranged marriages, the idea that you better find someone to marry by the time you hit a certain age, just the way that all of that has sort of shifted, same-sex couples, and can you have interracial couples, like all of that I find fascinating, and I just really wanted to kind of play with that. And at the same
Mm-hmm.
time, it was like technically an interesting project to shoot people in such a confined space.
Well, I can imagine. I mean, that was really, once I got over just the concept of like of so many people in different eras, then I started looking at the technical aspects where it's like, wait a minute, how in the world did she pull this off to have so many people lit well in a confined space? This obviously is a real bus, not some, studio half bus.
Right.
And so, I mean, even that, where it's like, okay, this is like to be a self, a personal project. It's like, man, this is serious.
And the thing about it is, once you've kind of committed, you got to commit. So it was
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
perfectly like serendipitous that we'd been wanting to kind of bring this idea to life, and the location, like where this would happen, was kind of a tough thing. So we did talk about this for a while, and
Hmm.
it was interesting because I was at a car-free day, um, not far from my house, and they were had a electric bus, for display for people to go in and look at.
Hmm.
And then there was this bus museum had this old bus on
Uh-huh.
display, just as a thing for kids to go in and look at. And I didn't know
Wow.
there was a bus museum in Vancouver.
Wow.
So it was just kind of perfectly timed, and it felt like the perfect location, because it's, one of those few places in the world where we get people from all walks of life together.
Yeah.
That and subways, and everyone is from somewhere different. And then the idea of them traveling was just kind of something that felt perfect too. Like the idea of like traveling through time, or is it just the idea of going places?
Well,
Um,
and I mean, I love that idea because you're right. I mean, in terms of those very specific areas where people from all walks of life end up shoulder to shoulder, side by side, yet they have come from different places, are going to different places for this short span of time, they are all moving together in the same direction from point A to point B.
yeah, yeah, I love that. Like, I mean, it's an interesting thing, because I feel like, yeah, it's there's very few places where you get all those people together.
Hmm.
So it felt like kind of the perfect place to do that.
Yeah. Well, hey, before we dig into your newest personal project, I want to talk a little bit about some of your conceptual images. That there are personal images of you and your family, which I love, but then other projects here that span a really wide range of personal, but then also other things too. And so let's also I definitely want to come back to these.
Yeah.
Those scared me the first time I saw them. Let's talk just a little bit about your commercial photography, your commercial work. When it comes to shots like these,
Hmm.
I mean, I'm sure that this is agency work. How much creativity do you get to inject into projects like this, or do they come to you fully formed and your job is to execute?
These, for the most part, come fully formed, and it's interesting to know how much back and forth. Like, I have been privy to that sort of idea of, when an agency is or network are in the midst of like trying to figure out what they want to do. And I mean, the ideas are typically fully formed and sketched out. And I love taking like a sketch and thinking, how, there's the technical part of like, how do we make this? Because
Right.
truthfully, sketches can be so wild with proportion and scale. Like, so technically trying to figure out, lensing and, all that sort of stuff. And then how do we build it and what's the best way to build it? So they do come fully formed, but then, there is the aspect of reading it and thinking, how will I light this? Like, should it feel natural? Should it feel, like otherworldly? How is that going to fit? Does it fit the overall vibe? But yeah, a lot of my commercial work comes formed, and and sometimes it doesn't, and it's a matter of like getting a lot of coverage to find something that works. But then again, it's really the message, right? It's the concept and the message that has to come through.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
now for you to be somebody who can go from a really large personal concept, like we were just looking through that you did on your own, to having a fully formed idea come to you, and your job is to, understand the vision, but then just figure out how to execute. That's a really wide range that not everybody can do. Tell us a little bit about your transition from, your days learning how a camera works to being able to make that jump of you and an assistant taking, one person's portrait, to having the agency folks and paid talent and a big crew and big lights, and kind of, how you wrap your head around these type of jobs versus personal jobs. And I mean, are they different or are they kind of the same?
Depending on the job, I think for the most part, the baseline is kind of the same. And I do approach my
Okay.
personal work in a similar manner that, like I actually sketch out my personal projects. So I actually am just shooting to my own comp.
Right. Okay.
So I do have a pretty good idea of what I think it should look like
Got it.
before I shoot.
So you sometimes get big projects from the Lindsay Sue agency.
Yeah.
Like, oh,
Her
another big
sketches
one
are
just came in the
terrible.
door.
And and it takes a while to think them up. And I think that, it's I think that there's a bit more breathing room with the stuff that I do for myself than there is with the stuff that comes from an agency. I feel fortunate that, I got to wear a lot of different hats as I was kind of from when I started my career, assisting, where you're just helping and it's technical,
Right.
to the digiteching, which, I mean, as a digitech, you kind of see everything. You're sort of, in a weird way, the last eyes on everything before it goes out raw. And then I did help out. I mean, it was interesting because I don't know how good of an assistant I really was in that. Say that, but I was really, really aware of my limitations as a photo assistant, and when depending on what I'm doing, I definitely have some. I hate to say it, but some big, strong guys who can do some heavy lifting for me.
Sure.
But not to say that women can't be great photo assistants. And I think that for me, it really was a matter of like finding my place and really like honing my strengths. So I did get to spend more time, I believe, in pre-production than other assistants may have. And I did get more time with talent and, getting people through or explaining what's happening, than someone who was doing more of, I'll call it the heavy lifting, and
Sure.
I think it's important for, and not to say that it can't go both ways, or not to say that it only has to be that way, of course. But I think that, it was interesting for me because I was really into photography and I really love studio photography. But I could see how, I couldn't pull a gigantic pelican out of the back of a truck. I still can't the way that other people can.
I prefer not to.
Threw my back out a few times.
I've been doing this long enough now so that all of my gear is as small as it possibly can be. There's I still have one big light case, but hey, if I don't need it, it stays in the car.
Right. No, absolutely.
If not, it stays at home.
Absolutely. I tend to really like the Pelican. I don't even know, is it 1510? Like the ones that go on, you can check, like bring on an airplane, because they're like a very small, still has wheels. That is my favorite case. But, so I do feel fortunate that I was allowed into some of the production side when I was photo assisting too, which I think opened my eyes to, how that could work. And just to be organized, to plan stuff, and to be able to execute.
When I think when a lot of people are getting into photo and video both, it's not always clear how much pre-production matters. I mean, that has gained so much importance over the years because, I started as a freelance camera guy shooting on TV shows. So my job for years was to show up, have the producer tell me what we're shooting, press the button, shoot that thing, then give them the tapes and go home.
Yeah.
But once I started Mixed Bag Media and started taking on full projects, it still took a while to really start working through the things that would happen on set and have me think, I wish I had thought about that before. And then you develop that list of questions that you then become part of your pre-pro process. And so, I love the fact that during your assistant days, you actually had more time, seeing how a project comes together, because it's so vitally important.
Oh, absolutely. It's one of the things that I think everyone in there, well, I shouldn't say everyone, but for me, even in my early days, I didn't look into as much. You're like, oh, well, this person will come, and then, do you have a backup plan if something's not interesting or if this doesn't work? And so I think, and I've had failed shoots where I was like, that didn't work, in the ways that you would have thought, like, when you're model testing or whatever, and you're like, oh yeah, like, so I think it's been a good learning process. But even just, putting a schedule together is tricky. Like there are so many moving parts to pull things off.
Absolutely.
So I feel very fortunate that I kind of got a glimpse of that, or paid attention to that. And I guess, I don't feel like it, but I am a fairly like buttoned down, organized person. And I think that is important, especially like if you've got a very full day.
Oh man.
Yeah.
So important.
Yeah. Not that I don't have people screaming in my ear still saying like, you've got 5 minutes, but at least that you have 5 minutes is super important.
That was definitely one of the hard lessons I had to learn, where it's like there were, more than a couple of days where I just roll in, freewheeling, be like, oh man, we're going to shoot all kind of great stuff. It's going to be awesome. Then, the first interview goes bad and everything gets like pushed back 30 minutes, and like single thing then gets, 5 more minutes pushed back. And you're at the end of the day, you're like, wait a minute, what happened?
Oh,
it just didn't
absolutely
work at all like it was supposed to.
Yeah. And even I think just having the foresight, like when that things are running late, and it's one thing I've had to learn is when you have one really great talent, that like, if you've got it, you got to know when to say that you've got it.
Yeah,
Only, because you
absolutely.
could, make up so much time. But I think in the past I was like, this person is fantastic. I want to keep going. I could do this forever. And that you shouldn't.
You get in that mode of like, man, this is fun. We're getting great stuff. This is awesome.
Totally.
See, that's a lesson that I learned from other DPs early on, of like when to say when and be like, all right, we got it. It's in the can, moving on, get to the next setup. We've got a long, busy day ahead of us.
Yeah.
It's like, it doesn't matter whether you can get more good stuff. If you don't need more good stuff, get going.
Yeah. I guess that kind of sucks for the talent that's really good.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
well, hey, speaking of talent that's really good, let's look at your newest personal project.
Let's do that.
A series of self-portraits that you've taken of yourself in a wide variety of clothing to emulate different eras, different feels, different type of personas. Tell us how you can, tell us first what this is, why you did it, and then how you came up with kind of the concept to be similar yet very different in all of the different images.
Yeah, this one was a funny one. And honestly, I think that like still with some of the work that I'm doing, like I still knock it back to like COVID did a number on us all. And yeah, I think I was just a little bit more open to slightly wackier ideas at that time. So this was shot in early 2022.
Okay.
And I'm only releasing it now just because it's taken me a really long time to wrap my head around whether or not I even want to put it out, because it felt just so personal. But at the same time, a lot of work was put into it. So, well, I it was kind of, a lot of stuff was just kind of percolating in my mind at the same time. So it was like I've always loved Cindy Sherman's work. I have always appreciated a self-portrait. I mean, and I, had my first dabbling of self-portraiture in that COVID series that I did during lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
And that was kind of, I had placed myself as someone completely different. It wasn't really a portrait. I didn't feel like those were entirely me, other than just, myself in my house, and they felt very natural. But because I had done that, I was like, oh, like that wasn't hard, but it would be interesting to really put yourself out there. And I think that was something that had been on my mind. And then at the same time, right around that time, my grandparents passed away a while ago, my last living grandparents, but my aunt and uncle moved out of their house. And I had been left with a whole bunch of wardrobe in the house that I hadn't seen in forever. Some of them I hadn't really placed, but it was like closets full of stuff, and that I had desperately wanted to go through before the house ended up getting torn down. And then, with my past grandparents, my other grandmother in LA, she had also gifted me a bunch of her clothes. And, I've always held on to them, traveled, like moved houses with them, don't know what to do with it. And then I amassed some more. And it was kind of like, I think that there's something really beautiful about, being given clothing or heirloom clothing. And, I love the clothes that I buy. And, sometimes it's like a small fortune. And even some dressy clothes, or, when someone puts something on, they're putting a lot of themselves into it, or how they present themselves.
Right.
That I think is just really special, like a closet full of like dreams and, hopes for themselves. And then there's just that whole idea of like, someone giving you the clothes off their back, which I love too. Yeah. Just, and when I think back to like the people in my life who have actually gifted me these things, would have given me anything and have given me everything, like moving to a new country. Like, what kind of world am I giving to, my children and grandchildren? So, I mean, there was something just really beautiful in that idea. And what amazes me is that they fit. Like, it's like between myself, my mother, and both grandmothers, we're all kind of the same size, which I find bizarre and weird.
Yeah. That is odd in a really cool way.
right? Like, yeah, it's really bizarre. And, I think about, even again, with that same theme about time and being born when you're born, like I often think like, I'm like basically kind of like just this amalgamation of all these people, but we kind of look the same. So there was that sort of element to it. And I knew that I wanted to do something with the clothes.
Okay.
Same time where I love Warhol's work, like the idea of mass production of art. And I think that that's something that came up early 2022. We were
Hmm.
all talking about NFTs. Like, and
Right.
I just I love artists' process of making art. You know, how did you do it? Why did you do it? All of those aspects of it. And when I was like looking at NFT work, especially, like the Bored Apes, which we all know, I was like, oh, it's just so interesting that, it's, computer generated. And, if I were to apply that to me, how would I do that? And, and my
Hmm.
brain went through a lot of things, and it wasn't really like an artistic thing. It was more of like a technical exercise because I
Right.
shoot advertising, we shoot entertainment, and we shoot plates, we shoot stuff that gets comped in. Like, how does that work? And I was like, how would that work? And would it look
Right.
any good? So it was just kind of just mulling over stuff. These are all unique individual images. So I haven't comped anything in to change anything, if that makes sense. Like they
Okay.
are all individual shots. But the
Love that.
idea of comping them in crossed my mind for a moment where I was like, oh, it'd be so funny if I, had like a hat or whatever that could just get. But it
Right.
was funny because I didn't like that idea of a portrait being put together that way. So I kind of went through a bunch of different like themes and kind of iterations of like mass production, and then even with the NFTs, the idea of someone else owning the art, and the idea of if you were to sell an NFT that's a portrait of someone, and the fact that people are using them as their own like profile images, like the
Hmm.
illustrations, I'm like, oh, it's so weird that someone can use someone else's face. And
It
so
is
that,
weird.
right?
I
So
agree.
it kind of all came together at once where I was like, oh, if I were to do an exercise, and I guess for a hot minute, I was thinking like of comping faces together that weren't
Hmm.
real. But then it was like, no, this is a perfect time to do it. A self-portrait project. Like that's what this should be. So it kind of all like went into this big melting pot of ideas and themes and things that I wanted to do. But in the end, it ended up being more so like a nod to like the whole NFT thing, because you can see some of the clothes reappear.
Hmm. I noticed that. I
Um,
like that it's always in different combinations, even if something appears again, that it's paired with one or more other pieces.
right. Yeah. So like I wanted to give a nod to that. And then at the same time, it was the idea of everything looking identical, like mass production, but in a completely different way. And I wanted to also, share some of that wardrobe that I don't know where it's going to go, but I loved also just the idea of like the fact that we are versions of different people and we've come from different people, you know.
It's I mean, this is such a great depiction of that kind of simple idea of you are what you wear.
Right.
Because one of the things that I love about this series is that it's obvious that it's you. You can tell it's the same person, but there are so many different characters and personas illustrated that if you only if a viewer only saw one of these, it'd be like, okay, that woman is blank.
Right.
And then somebody else would see a different one and be like, oh, that woman is this other thing. Like they
Right.
would think that these are totally like people from different walks of life, totally different backgrounds, totally different present day. I mean, the kind of touching back to where we started and just the story that can be translated in an image. Every single one of these women all have a different story. And I love that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, and some of the choices that I made, like there were some where I felt like, especially when I was wearing like my different grandmother's clothes, I was like, I kind of want to be a little bit more badass, because they were, though you would never see a photo. Like, I have gone through my family's photo albums, and I'm like, find it interesting that they presented themselves in a way, but I'm like, they were so hard, not hard in a bad way, but tough,
Right.
have had the life that they had. So yeah, I kind of wanted to have a little bit of that vibe in some of these shots, because I'm like, no, they were super, super strong women. And just,
there's a through line of kind of obvious confidence, like, and that toughness, and the idea of toughness definitely comes through for me. I mean, that it's like, okay, all of these women have standing in their lives, whatever their life is. They all know who they are and kind of where they are in their day to day.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I mean,
you know,
it's so interesting and cool to look through these and imagine those different stories.
right. It was fun. And I mean, it was, and sometimes when you put on the clothes, you just feel it, like, which was interesting to me, because I don't typically sit in for photos. So it was interesting to me to, like, yeah, get to feel like these different people.
Well, Lindsay, before we go, I mean, let's talk a little bit about APA, the idea of networking, and even just, why you entered the Something Personal contest, or why you think these ideas that we've been discussing are so important. Like, talk to me about how a team that you can pull together via organizations like APA are so important to pull into off big ideas like you have.
Well, number one, I just love personal work. Like, I think so much of, what we do, and even working with different clients, is about the person. Like, it's, I hope that we're all, viewed as individuals who bring different things to the table, or a different gaze, a different thought process. So I do think that the Something Personal and the personal work just shows so much of who each photographer, artist is. And again, it kind of links back to my idea of, like, I love people and I love hearing where people came from. And, photography is like an amazing thing that you get to see something through someone else's eyes. Is, one of the things that I love when I was going through my family's photo albums, some photos were just so silly. And it was back in the day when, you had limited number of frames in a roll of film.
You had to be choosy when you push the button.
Very choosy. But then you see some photos that my grandparents chose to take. And I'm like, wow, this is like life through your eyes at that time. And you chose to, not like today, because we kind of photograph everything, but especially with film, like, it's such a beautiful thing to think about seeing something through someone else's eyes. And so I think about that.
My wife and I go to a lot of estate sales, and we both are sad and excited to see old family photo albums.
Right.
Because there are so many images like that where you're like, man, why did they take that image of that scene at that moment? Like, what was it that spoke to them on that day in 1927?
Totally, right? Like,
I mean, it's so weird and cool to think about.
And then you burned a frame. Like, that was what you chose to photograph. Yeah, I love that. And I think that, the personal work and kind of shows like this are like, allow us to do that now. Like, I want to know what you're thinking, or what do you see? And, it informs so much about, like, who you are, and, maybe what you think, or what you want other people to think. Yeah, I think it's great. And, in an industry where we often photograph other people's ideas, yeah, it's just beautiful to see.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Lindsay, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, and go through your work and answer all the questions I have. I have so many more that I could ask as well, but we need to wrap it up for today. I might.
Absolutely.
I may take you up on that.
Absolutely, you should. It was really nice meeting you too. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. And for all the viewers out there, make sure to check out the APA-SF website. Subscribe to our Instagram feed. That's a great place to see featured artists, both local and abroad, as well as keep up with any and all the events that we have going on here in the Bay Area. So until next time, I'm Jon Milavec for APSF. We'll see you soon. Bye-bye.